Murray was hired to kill him. Let's establish something the mainstream coverage glossed over. Conrad Murray was not a successful, high-flying physician when he was hired to serve as Michael Jackson's personal doctor. He was broke. Court records revealed that Murray owed at least $780,000 in outstanding judgments, delinquent mortgage payments, unpaid child support across multiple women, and overdue student loans. He was a cardiologist with personal finances in free fall. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, he was offered $150,000 per month. That's $1.8 million a year to be Jackson's doctor during the This Is It concert rehearsals. The theory goes like this. Powerful people wanted Michael Jackson dead. He was worth over $1 billion in publishing assets alone. His ownership stake in the Sony ATV catalog, which included hundreds of Beatles songs he had purchased in 1985 for $47.5 million, was a prize that certain parties had been trying to pry away from him for years. A doctor drowning in personal debt suddenly handed a salary that would wipe out his problems many times over in a role where he had private, unsupervised access to his patient every single night. That's not a coincidence, that's a recruitment. The coroner's official ruling was not accidental death, it was homicide, not manslaughter homicide. The manner of death was ruled a homicide by the Los Angeles County Department of Medical Examiner. Murray was charged with the lesser crime of involuntary manslaughter and served under 2 years. Jackson's family did not accept that. LaToya Jackson said publicly, "I feel it was all about money. Michael was worth well over $1 billion in music publishing assets, and somebody killed him for that." She added, "I believe, Doctor." Murray was part of a much larger plan. These are not the words of a grieving sibling grasping at theories. LaToya was the first family member at the hospital. She was in that room. She saw what she saw, and she has never changed her story. Sony and the Beatles catalog. In 1985, Michael Jackson made the smartest business move in music history. He purchased ATV Music Publishing, the company that owned the rights to most of the Beatles catalog, for $47.5 million. Paul McCartney was reportedly furious. The music industry was stunned, and Sony, who would eventually co-own the catalog with Jackson after he sold them a 50% stake in 1995, was never comfortable with the arrangement. Jackson owned something Sony wanted entirely, and the relationship between them was, to put it mildly, hostile. In 2002, Michael Jackson went public. He stood outside a Sony building in New York and called Sony Music CEO Tommy Mottola a devil and a racist. He accused the label of deliberately sabotaging his 2001 album Invincible, giving it no radio promotion, no marketing push, no support specifically to run him into debt and force him to surrender his catalog stake. The album still sold 4 million copies despite the blackout. Sony denied the sabotage, but multiple industry insiders backed Jackson's account. By 2006, with debt mounting, Sony had negotiated an option to purchase a further chunk of Jackson's ownership share if he went bankrupt. The catalog by that point was valued at approximately $1 billion. The incentive to push Jackson to financial collapse and claim the prize was enormous. Jackson died in June 2009. Within months, his share of the catalog fell under estate control. By 2016, Sony had purchased the Jackson estate's full 50% stake for $750 million, making Sony the sole owner of the most valuable music catalog in history. The deal that Jackson had fought his entire adult life to prevent, the one he had publicly called racist and corrupt, the one he had threatened to raise money to block through the This Is It concerts, was completed just 7 years after his death. The people who benefited most directly from Jackson dying when he did were the exact people he had spent years identifying as his enemies. AEG Live knew and did nothing. AEG Live was the concert promoter behind the This Is It residency, 50 shows at London's O2 Arena that would have been the biggest comeback in music history. They had enormous financial exposure on the tour. And multiple pieces of testimony from the wrongful death trial suggest that AEG executives knew Michael Jackson was in physical crisis weeks before he died and pushed forward anyway. Staff members who worked closely with Jackson during rehearsals described him looking like a skeleton. One staffer sent an email to Jackson's manager, Frank DeLeo, that read, "Please intervene, concerts are not worth jeopardizing his life for." DeLeo did not respond. AEG Live CEO Randy Phillips had seen that email. He did nothing. Jackson's choreographer Kenny Ortega testified that Jackson had appeared frail and deeply unwell at rehearsals in the days before his death. An AEG executive was overheard saying Jackson should continue rehearsing regardless of his declining condition. Then comes the most chilling testimony of the entire trial. Prince Jackson, Michael's own son, who was 12 at the time, testified under oath that his father regularly broke down crying after getting off phone calls with AEG executives. Prince testified his father would say, "They're gonna kill me. They're gonna kill me." Prince identified the people his father was talking about as AEG CEO Randy Phillips and his ex-manager Dr. Tome Tome. Prince also testified that the night before his father died, while Jackson was at his final rehearsal, Phillips came to the house and had what Prince described as an aggressive encounter with Conrad Murray. Grabbing his elbow, getting in his face, making hand gestures. Phillips denied the conversation went the way Prince described it, but Prince never wavered from his account. That was his last conversation with his father. The next morning, Michael Jackson was dead. Paris Jackson? It was a setup. In 2017, Paris Jackson, Michael's only daughter, gave an interview to Rolling Stone that stopped the world. She was 18. She was asked directly about her father's death. Her answer was unambiguous. She said she was absolutely convinced her father had been murdered. She said the entire Jackson family knew it. She said her father used to drop hints that people were out to get him. When pressed on who she thought was responsible, she stopped short of naming names but said she had thoughts and intended to pursue justice. This was not an off-the-cuff comment. This was a deliberate statement from a woman who was 11 years old when she watched paramedics work on her father's body, who walked into that bedroom, who was at that hospital when Conrad Murray told her and her brothers, "Sorry kids, your dad's dead." Paris Jackson had spent years processing what happened, and when she finally spoke publicly, what she said was, it was a setup. Everybody in the family knows it. Her brother Prince had already testified under oath that their father was terrified of the people running his comeback tour. Their nephew, TJ Jackson, who became co-guardian of the children after Michael's death, also testified at the wrongful death trial that he believed his uncle had been murdered. 3 members of Michael Jackson's immediate family, in separate statements, under different circumstances, have all said the same thing: not grief, not denial. A belief, held firmly and stated publicly, that Michael Jackson was killed deliberately and that the people responsible have not been held accountable. Murray's CPR was deliberately wrong. Conrad Murray was a cardiologist. He was not a general practitioner who wandered into propofol administration by accident. He had a medical degree, years of training, and a board certification in cardiovascular disease, which makes what he did and what he failed to do on the morning of June 25th, 2009, extraordinarily difficult to explain as simple negligence. Murray administered propofol to Jackson not in a hospital, not with emergency equipment on hand, not with a resuscitation team present, but alone, in a bedroom, using a makeshift intravenous setup. When Jackson stopped breathing, Murray attempted CPR while Jackson was still on the bed. Basic emergency medicine training, the kind every first-year medical student learns, specifies that CPR must be performed on a hard, flat surface for it to have any chance of working. Performing it on a soft mattress is not an error a cardiologist makes by accident. It is an error that ensures the patient does not recover. Murray also did not call 911. When he realized Jackson had no pulse, he ran downstairs and found a security guard who called emergency services. The delay cost critical minutes. When paramedics finally arrived, they worked on Jackson for 42 minutes at the scene before transporting him. Experts at Murray's criminal trial testified that every decision Murray made that morning, the propofol dosage, the administration setting, the CPR technique, the 911 delay, was a deviation from basic medical standards. Murray's defense argued Jackson had self-administered extra propofol. Prosecutors argued Murray set up the conditions for a fatal outcome and then failed to respond in any way that could have saved him. The jury agreed with the prosecutors. Murray served less than 2 years. Michael Jackson faked his own death. This is the theory that exploded across the internet within hours of the death announcement. Michael Jackson was facing potential bankruptcy. His debt was reportedly as high as $500 million. He was about to perform 50 shows in London, a schedule that people close to him said he was physically incapable of completing. He had spent years wearing disguises in public, using body doubles as decoys, and telling people he dreamed of disappearing and living a normal life. The theory: Jackson orchestrated the entire thing, faked his death, and walked away from an empire that was crushing him. The conspiracy caught fire 2 months after his death when a German broadcaster called RTL released a video that appeared to show a man resembling Jackson climbing out of a coroner's van and walking away. The video spread to millions of viewers within days. RTL later admitted it was a deliberate experiment, a staged piece of misinformation to show how fast false content travels online. But the admission came too late. The clip had already embedded itself into the collective imagination of Jackson's fanbase as proof. Even after RTL's confession, dedicated conspiracy communities kept the video alive as evidence, resharing it endlessly on forums and early social media platforms. Fans pointed to his death certificate, which listed his middle name as Joseph, but family members in LaToya confirmed it was actually Joe, a wrong middle name on an official death document. In a Janet Jackson song released in 2015 called The Great Forever, a fan slowed down background audio and claimed to hear a voice saying, "I'm not happy with what you're digging. I'm busy living my life." The voice was attributed to Michael. None of it was verified. All of it spread. 3 documentary films were released claiming to prove Jackson was alive. A cottage industry of books, websites, and YouTube channels dedicated to the theory has generated real revenue for over a decade. Whether Jackson faked his death or not, someone has certainly profited from the possibility that he did. The FBI was watching him. Michael Jackson believed, in the final years of his life, that powerful forces were monitoring him. He told people in his inner circle that he was being watched. He spoke about enemies in the industry who wanted him silenced. Some dismissed it as paranoia, but here is a fact. The FBI maintained files on Michael Jackson for years. The agency's involvement related primarily to child abuse allegations and extortion attempts, and the files were eventually released under the Freedom of Information Act. They do not contain evidence of a government plot against Jackson, but their existence confirms something Jackson had always insisted, that federal resources were being directed at him. The broader theory connects Jackson's outspoken attacks on the music industry to a motive for surveillance or elimination. Jackson wasn't just a pop star, he owned the most valuable music catalog in the world. He had publicly accused Sony of racism and corruption. He had threatened to blow the lid off what he called systemic exploitation of black artists by white-controlled corporations. He was preparing 50 sold-out shows that would have generated hundreds of millions of dollars, money that would have gone to him, not his creditors or his label. A man in that position, with that platform, making those accusations, was a threat to specific financial interests. Whether those interests manifested as surveillance, sabotage, or something worse has never been definitively established, but Jackson himself believed it, and his family believes it still. The sightings and the ongoing mystery. If Michael Jackson faked his death and walked away, the trail of supposed evidence begins almost immediately. Shortly after the death announcement, a border official reported seeing a man matching Jackson's description crossing from California into Mexico. No photographs, no follow-up confirmation. But the report circulated widely and was never officially addressed. Jackson had spent years moving through public spaces with disguises, masks, and decoys. He had the infrastructure and the experience to disappear if he chose to. In 2015, fans noticed something in a Janet Jackson song. Buried in the background audio of The Great Forever, a voice that sounded familiar was allegedly saying he was alive and didn't want to be found. Listeners slowed it down, isolated it, and the clip went viral. Janet never addressed it. The same year, conspiracy communities noted that Jackson's death certificate contained what appeared to be an error in his middle name, listed as Joseph in full, when family members had always referred to it as the shortened Joe. A small discrepancy, but on a document that should have been verified multiple times before filing. Jackson's funeral itself was a closed casket service held at the Staples Center, the same arena where he had been rehearsing the night before he died. His bronze casket reportedly cost $25,000 and was on public display, but no public viewing of the body was offered. The private burial was held at Forest Lawn Memorial Park. The combination of a closed casket, no public viewing, and a burial ceremony that virtually nobody outside the immediate family witnessed has never stopped conspiracy communities from asking the obvious question. How do you know for certain who was in that box? The official answer is the autopsy, the toxicology report, and the criminal trial of Conrad Murray. For millions of people, that answer has never been quite enough.